Welcome to the Afterglow podcast, a space to practice Yoga Nidra informed by the ideas of Carl Jung and internal family systems. Each week we will work on a different life theme, giving us the opportunity to discover vast inner landscapes, sitting with all that life has to offer as we explore who we are. May the afterglow be as bright as the journey is deep. This week we'll be introducing a very important aspect of internal work, the inner child. For me, this has proven to be the most consistently impactful aspect of inner work. It has immediate effect, and with continual practice I find it to be the most transformative internal system. That may not be everyone's experience, but it's definitely been mine. And I'll be discussing this work today mostly through the lens of internal family systems and sharing ways to do this practice without the steps of Yoga Nidra so that it can become a regular way to check in with yourself. Let's dive in. I mentioned in a previous episode that it is less inner child and more inner children, but in fact it's less inner children and more inner impressions of self, because they can be any age. It can be a child, a teenager, or even us in adulthood. However, it is likely that for the most part and for most of us, the inner impressions will be child versions of ourselves, because that is when we are softest, most available to be bruised by the external forces in the family system, in school, or even just by not being sufficiently prepared for some of the things that life is going to throw at us. Today I'll be outlining how to use Yoga Nidra to get started with inner child work, but also I'll be discussing how to quickly and easily do it as and when is needed without having to do the Yoga Nidra steps, as a way to check in regularly with our inner selves and with our inner children. We don't always need to do the whole song and dance of Yoga Nidra to commune with these parts. Yoga Nidra is just a tool to get into a fluid space, a way to ease us into a state of semi-consciousness where the dream mind can come forward. With practice it becomes easier to get into, and in time there is less and less requirement for the Yoga Nidra steps when it comes to the inner child work. It's a bit different to the body appreciation in this way, where it would be very difficult to get the same quality of experience for body appreciation work without the Yoga Nidra. Whereas with inner child work, I would say the goal is to become so familiar and at ease that you simply need to close your eyes and, or even with your eyes open, turn your gaze inward, finding the familiar spaces and the familiar impressions of these parts of you. In a few days I will upload part 2, and this will contain the Yoga Nidra. I hope that it will be a cathartic way for you to meet with and connect with one of your inner children, or, as I mentioned, an inner impression of self. And in this way we are turning the lights on a new path or a new space inside of us, and slowly becoming more acquainted the fact that it is not currently brightly lit does not mean it is something to fear. It means it simply needs to have a light switch go on. And that's the work that we'll be doing in a few days. And this is all an attempt to create momentum, a push to get you thinking and relating to parts of yourself regularly, and therefore experiencing a more whole self, finding more clarity where certain behaviors or triggers come from, accessing increased ability to be playful, and being more confident in setting boundaries. Unsurprisingly, the concept of inner child came from the work of Carl Jung, as he focused on the archetype of the divine child. For those who have read his autobiography, they will be familiar with his detailed stories of his childhood psyche. And for those who haven't read his book, his autobiography specifically, it's called Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. It is an exceptionally good read, and I cannot recommend it highly enough. And in this book, there are many accounts of important transformative points in his childhood. Jung placed great care and attention on pivotal moments in the psyche's development. We see this in his descriptions of personality 1 and personality 2. We see it in his torment as he avoids a blasphemous thought, his religious terror at a Jesuit priest, and of course, we see it in how the adults in his life relate to him, especially his parents and teachers, and how this leads him as a child to understanding neurosis. Much of the book focuses on these early moments as a map to the development of one's adult mind. Great empathy is given to the inner child, and it is clear that Jung felt there was a great deal of tenderness to be offered to these impressions of self. How this all relates to inner family systems. Well, one of the reasons why internal family systems blend so well with Jungian psychotherapy is because IFS works with what is called parts. IFS came about in the 80s through the work of Richard Schwartz. And he was working with patients predominantly with eating disorders and who were self-harming. And he felt at a loss with one particular patient, and he was desperate to find a way to help her. He began using the same concepts of family systems, applying them internally. Family systems is a psychoanalytical method that works to resolve conflict within families. And Schwartz just applied these techniques and principles that he had been using externally, internally. That is, imagining that all the different parts of a patient's mind act as a family. They have different roles and functions and personalities, much like external families. He found that the effects were rapid and long-lasting. He began studying and refining this new method of internal family systems over the next few decades. Since then, IFS has quietly been growing in popularity until more recently, when there has been an explosion of interest in the last few years. A quick description of how IFS works. These parts I mentioned before, they come along and they take over as we need their expertise. Every feeling that comes up in response to us just going about our lives is a part. Some of them are major players, considerable aspects of our persona, and they're easily identifiable, especially to people in our lives who are closest to us, like the stingy part, or the part that is overly reliant on others, or the part in us that is the people pleaser. And then there are parts that IFS calls exiles. Exiles are parts that have split off and are hidden away, and they're often eclipsed by what is called a protector part. The protector part often engages in compulsive behavior in a misguided attempt to protect the exiled part. Compulsive spending, compulsive pornography watching. These protector parts are governed by beliefs that no longer serve us, and were often formed when we were young and had a limited scope of the world. While using IFS as therapy, we are encouraged to work with all of these parts, governing them as the self with a capital S. This self with a capital S is of primary importance to the work of IFS and maps beautifully onto Jung's work with individuation as a process to integration of the self. I will quote now from IFS Institute's website on the description of the self with a capital S, which, I should say, is the same self with a capital S that Jung uses, and while I cannot display a capital S when I'm talking, I would say it's almost always safe to assume, in this podcast anyway, that when I say the word self, I am referring to this version of self. On the IFS website, it describes the self with a capital S as being competent, secure, self-assured, relaxed, and able to listen and respond to feedback. How I describe the self with a capital S to my students and to you now here is that it is a neutral space that has capacity unlike we have ever known to give love, attention, and tend to the needs and forces that are much more affected by the outer world and by external forces. The self is able to govern with calm and devotion in service of a whole system being in balance. I'm going to give you some insight into what to expect in the Yoga Nidra in a few days, and that can also help you gain some insight in terms of how this work gets utilized. To use a hypothetical example, let's say that you find yourself at 8 years old. Let's say that being 8 was a very traumatizing time in your childhood. Let's say your parents were separating, and your world, the external framework that supported your psyche, is literally being split in two. And let's say that your parents tried to support you, but despite their efforts, it wasn't sufficient. You still felt a deep sense of fragility and fear. And since then, that part of you has been left adrift. What we are doing in this inner work is finding these parts of ourselves that have been left adrift. This tends to be easy for the most part because they tend to seek us out as soon as we make an attempt to find them and reunite. There will be time for this reunion, this wonderful moment to give this part of yourself enormous amounts of love. Hold them in your arms, reassure them. then, and this is the most important part, we take them back with us. We no longer leave them abandoned in this memory, alone at 8, trying to make sense of their world, trying to self-soothe with techniques that only have temporary benefits, like comfort eating, like yelling and demanding attention, like admonishing ourselves for being stupid. When we bring this inner child back with us, we are able to parent them, we're able to soothe them, rescue them, provide for them, give them a new psychological framework to view themselves. You will experience immediate relief with even just one encounter with the inner child. And through repeatedly engaging with them, which I will get to in a moment, we will find that compulsive behaviors will reduce. Continuing with the example I set out before, this means less desire for comfort eating, less inclination to yell and demand attention. When we feel adrift or forgotten, it means less internal negative speak. As you gain confidence in this work, you can bring more and more parts of yourself into the present. There is no need to do them all at once. Rather, give each one its own moment of reconnection as it arrives naturally. When we do the Yoga Nidra in a few days, just trust what comes up. I want to move into describing different methods, different ways in which we can regularly do this inner child work. Especially because I keep saying how doing Yoga Nidra to access inner children is phenomenal when it comes to doing it for first encounters and to get familiar with this work, but ongoing it's too clunky and prohibitive. And so I'm going to outline some methods, and I recommend playing around and seeing what works for you, being open to imaginative play in this type of work, and you can do all of the different suggestions that I am going to give, or one or none. You can do one that you've completely come up with on your own, and that's also fabulous, as long as you're engaging with your inner children. I think that it all works out, and because nothing I say is prescriptive, so yeah, take this guidance and find what suits you best. So I think possibly the best one in terms of, we can make a big elaborate meal that's full of nutrients and wonderful delicious food, and it's just really, really healthy, and it's a great meal, and we have it once a month, and that's fabulous. But if we had to eat just a little bit more fruit and veg every day, even just a bit, the benefits would far outweigh that one big elaborate meal. And so the first method, I think in many ways, is the simplest and possibly just the most effective, which is that you have a little moment every day or a few times a week, whenever possible, to check in with your inner children. If you don't get to do it every night, that's okay. And if all you can do sometimes is just sort of yell internally, "I love you," that's great. I think it's really important to be silly and fun with our inner children, because they are silly and fun. And sometimes if I am exhausted and I have not checked in with my inner children in a few days and I've been really busy, I will just quickly go inside and envision them and just say, let's say about 4 nights a week, you're able to put aside 10 minutes before bed, 2 minutes before bed. I don't think that we should confuse the length of time and the act. 20 seconds of casting that internal gaze towards our inner children has such profound benefits and is such a enriching experience that it becomes meaningless to start finding prescriptive lengths of time that need to be achieved, and then when we inevitably fail, we feel bad about ourselves, and then we feel like we've failed our inner children. So when I say 10 minutes or 2 minutes, don't worry too much about that as a prescriptive thing. I'm saying it as a general bracket of time. And yeah, you just close your eyes, make sure that you can have as little distraction from the outer world as possible. Maybe you sense that one particular inner child needs a hug or wants to come forward, and you can just hold them in your mind's eye. Pour love into them. Give them kisses on their forehead. Tell them how fabulous they are. And then maybe it was a part of you that was really struggling in school and felt really unintelligent. And maybe you need to just sit there and list all the ways in which they were incredibly smart and doing so well. They just couldn't see it at the time, but that you can see it now. Perhaps you share soft and supportive words with them that is not unlike a parent, because you're parenting them in the way they needed, in the way that they didn't receive. Maybe you encourage them to behave in ways that they were discouraged from behaving. Perhaps you were discouraged from behaving differently to the gender that you were given. Maybe you wanted to be more feminine or more masculine. Maybe you wanted to be really sassy and give people a little bit of fun, campy attitude, but you weren't allowed to do that. Maybe you were never allowed to be sad. You had to always be happy and funny and make everyone laugh. Without saying anything, parents instruct. They lay the groundwork for what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. Even the best of parents will do this. Because, and this is the subject for an entirely different episode, one of Jung's most quoted sayings or beliefs is that nothing affects the child more than the unlived life of the parent. No one is fully individuated, no one is a perfect human being, and all parents will cast some shadows and some internal confusion for their children to unpack and unpick later in life. But that's why it's so important that we have this space that is free of parents. It is just us. We can parent ourselves from a much more neutral position. We can create a familiar landscape where we can just be in our most natural state. Even if it means sitting in our beds at 11 o'clock at night, with our eyes closed, imagining us and our inner child at, let's say, 11, and we're braiding flowers into each other's hair. This time spent is more valuable than I can possibly describe to you in words. I cannot convince you. You will understand once you begin, because it is nuanced and subtle, and it is extremely personal. And it creates an internal strengthening that will stay with you for life. Children want to play. Like all children, the versions of us that are inside of our psyches, versions of us that have been hurt in some small or large way, they cannot access their playful side until their wounds have been tended to. Anyone that has spent time with a 4-year-old will know exactly what I'm talking about. As many times as they need you to cuddle them and support them through the darkest thoughts and fears, you continue to show up for them for all of it. And when they are ready, they will just want to play. Play will then be their resting space. Play will become easier for you too in your outer life. As with being inquisitive, unabashed, more confident. Then when a trigger comes, perhaps a harsh judgment from a stranger or a sibling's indifference, you are able to, in real time, hold that inner child that was so wounded by these patterns. And you can protect them, assure them, set boundaries for them. No matter your age, an inner child needs boundaries from external stresses. It is easier psychologically to set these boundaries for our inner children sometimes than for our present selves. This is the transcendent function in action. We are able to create this third space, create a more supportive structure to clearly ascend out of a space we previously felt consumed us. And maybe we don't have 10 minutes, but we have a place that develops over time where our inner children live. I have a place. I won't share it, but it came about naturally. I didn't judge it. And if it ever evolves, I will allow it to. But it is safe and wonderful, and I can go to this place and talk with my inner children, give them undivided attention, play with them, or simply offer them a blanketed message of connectedness, reminding them that we're all together and that this space is safe and permanent, that they are with me now, no longer adrift in some memory I would rather not think about, but rather they are alive, thriving in this present moment. No external relationships, homes, jobs, or behaviors will interfere with this space. It is permanently fixed securely within us if we give it the chance to, and be there for the rest of time. And this needs to become an absolute non-negotiable. The appearance of this space may change, but the core function cannot and will not. And if we go through a period of binging on mind-altering substances, or if we go through a bad depression or experience a time of heightened stress, that means that we cannot access this space for a long time. I say cannot, not because we cannot, but rather because we are looking so far outward that we are not able to give ourselves the time to look inward. But if we go through these phases, it does not change the existence of this space. The more we visit it, the more support our inner children have, and the less likely we are to find imbalance in the first place. But nonetheless, imbalance will always come up eventually, and all the more reason to have this familiar space to return to, with all of these inner children to play with and learn from and be empowered by, bringing all of these faculties back to us. And giving us much more clear view on who we are before adulthood, and being jaded and shaped by society and relationships. So this is the first way, the first option, just trying to find these regular check-ins. And when we do, you will intuit which inner child needs a moment of connection over another. It is not to say that every night you are connecting with all of the different inner children that you've brought back over time into this safe space. It could be that one night, one particular inner child needs love based on the day that you had, or based on something happening in your unconscious mind. And just let that intuition guide you. It's sometimes sufficient just to give them a momentary hug, to show them care. And just having even the thought of it has an immensely positive impact. The next method is when we need it because we are triggered by an external force. We give the affected inner child love, protection, and nurture in real time. This gets much easier as we get more familiar with this work. In time, we can even start to communicate with certain people in our external environment who are safe to communicate this work with. And give them a little bit of insight into how they affect you unconsciously through their behavior and how it impacts your inner child. But again, in time, when some familiarity is built and with people who are safe to share that level of vulnerability with. And then another option is consciously spending time, quality time, with ourselves. Maybe it is playing a video game that 7-year-old you loved, perhaps reading a cheesy young adult fiction book, or drawing, or playing with silly hairstyles, or making up a dance. This doesn't have to consume your life. It just comes from an increased sensitivity to balance. As you find yourself doing more and more mind-numbing life admin, you purposefully make time for an inner child you intuitively know is pushing against all of this horrible adult stuff. And you tell that child, this time is for you, baby. I want to spend this time with you now. And we're going to make clay shapes. And maybe we're going to throw them against a wall afterward. With this dedicated time, it's also about getting out of our own way and letting the inner child steer just a little bit. In healthy ways, they can express their frustration at rules by throwing these clay sculptures that we make that were fun, but not as much fun as watching them crumble apart as they explode against a brick wall. Let's say perhaps a sibling visits and stays with you for a week, and they tend to be very critical of some parts of you. And after a week of protecting yourself and keeping up an energetic barrier, you're exhausted and you want to balance it out. And you can do this by intuiting which inner child is being affected by this criticism with your sibling and how they need to be soothed. Again, tell them that you're spending time with them when you do. Say it internally, say it out loud. Let's do this thing together. I love you and I want to spend time with you. And I really want to do this particular activity together right now. And at the end, and internally or out loud, saying thank you. I had a blast. That was great. Giving them a big hug. This is really important. Some people feel too cool to do this. Maybe they think it's being overly sincere. But a simple rule is this: if you had a real child in front of you who wanted your attention, who you could see was showing signs of stress, of being worn down by external forces in life, you would treat them with absolute love and care. Give them what they need to feel seen and understood, important and lovable. And you would say, we are doing this thing. You would communicate with them. You would give them certain indicators of support and security and reassurance. You would not chastise them for having needs or for liking something. You would just go along with the animal noises that they wanted to make. Or maybe if you're working with an inner teenager and listening to really chaotic music and dancing like crazy in the dark. And obviously it probably goes without saying, but just so it's said, while it is good not to judge the behavior of these inner children and their needs and desires, that also does not mean making space for self-destruction. Self-destruction is off limits entirely, and it is the work of this parenting the inner children that means that it's always a case of moving away from self-destructive behavior, moving towards love, connection, comfort, validation. In preparation of the work we'll be doing in the Yoga Nidra in a few days, I recommend finding some time to look through old photographs of you as a child or as a teenager. Pay attention to the details of the photos, jewelry, clothes, the way you wear your hair, the expression on your face. See if there is a particular photo and time in your life that is intriguing. You don't have to know what or why, just find a natural gravitation. Take one or two photos, the ones that have the biggest intrigue or pull. and put them up somewhere where you will see them every day. If you only have a digital photo, make it your background on your phone. Notice any responses that you have when you look at these pictures. Notice if you judge yourself or if you feel great joy or care, if you want to laugh, if you feel like you simply don't remember that era and that version of you. Do not judge the response that you have. Simply observe. And ask yourself, what was one of your favorite things to do in childhood? Perhaps you have a long list, but try. Try and get just 1 or 2 activities. Shortening the list, shortening, to just 1 or 2, like dancing or watching movies. They don't have to be overly complicated or hyper special in terms of making you unique compared to others, but they should be hyper special in the sense that they made you feel really, really good. Not just a comfort, like binge watching 10 hours of cartoons in your PJs eating cereal on the floor by the couch. Honing in a little bit, something that also made you feel alive, lit up inside, made you feel like you were in the zone, filled with a sense of wholeness and being just completely present, and that afterwards you felt a great sense of either accomplishment or connection to self. So I get that it's a slightly tricky thing. On the one hand, I'm saying it can be a totally bland activity, and it can be TV. However, I don't fully trust the mind around TV. But it also needs to be something that gave you an incredibly special feeling. I trust that you'll figure it out. Have a great rest of the week. Good things are coming. Thank you for joining us for this weekly companion episode. It really does add to the experience that you will have in Yoga Nidra. The Yoga Nidra will be uploaded in a few days, giving you time to reflect on the questions that I've asked you. Please subscribe to receive notifications for this new Yoga Nidra episode as well as for future ones. Thank you for adding your light and kindness to the world and for doing this important inner work. May the afterglow be as bright as the journey is deep. See you soon.